and he's taken the name Thoth, who's Ptah's colleague. Thoth was the teacher of scholars like me, and writing. He invented writing, whereas Ptah was the overlord of architecture and building. And he has traditionally has a green skin, which is interesting. Symbol of life. He has a beard, long pointy beard, and he holds a scepter, combining three powerful symbols of ancient Egyptian religion. It's called the Was scepter, and the word Was meant power. So, but they meant spiritual power by that. The Egyptians weren't, into going out and conquering. They were into giving power in the right place to the right people at the right time. And that's why their religion was about initiation. And I think that's why the Greeks liked it, because they came from Alephsis, their initiatory things. Alexander knew all that. And when he founded Alexandria, he wanted it to be a centre for esoteric knowledge, which it became. And there they translated the Bible into Greek. There were many sages in Alexandria, scientists, attached to the museum, which he founded. And it was under the Ptolemies, his most trusted general, took over the control of Egypt. We haven't found his body yet, and there's a Greek archaeologist working in Alexandria as we speak, who has the name Calliope. Her Christian name is Calliope the Muse. I have a room called Calliope here. She is determined to find the body of Alexander the Great, and they found tunnels under Alexandria, which seem to hint at maybe he's down there somewhere. There's a brilliant Netflix new documentary about all this, where Calliope is interviewed and describes it, and it's just come out, a few months ago, weeks. Okay, that's Ptah, and I would say what he represents is mankind's best interest now is to get building again. Let's rebuild Gaza. Let's rebuild the shattered lives that are being destroyed in war. Let's rebuild the cities of Ukraine that are being shattered. Let's pay architects and builders more than soldiers. What they're doing is knocking stuff down. Let's put people like Putin into mental hospitals with their deranged neo-fascist ideology. Like Hitler was right to invade Poland. I mean, come on, people of Russia, get rid of this guy. And, they are beginning to stand up. Of course, Putin won't let anyone stand against him. This guy who stood got hundreds of thousands of signatures, and still Putin says, oh, you can't stand. I mean, that's not a democracy, is it? It's a fakery. So let's honour Ptah, let's get building again. I've written articles about peace building. That's about the name of it, what we should be doing on this planet, building peace and working with the energies of Ptah and all the other gods. I don't care what name you want to use for them. And let's share authority and power. So it's not like my religion is best, my culture's best. It's we share this. Yes. Okay, now let's move on to the next one. Yeah, comment.
At the beginning of your talk tonight, you spoke about the cosmic law.
Yeah.
And about Ptah, I was thinking about the pyramid as a building for cosmic connection. And my hope is to build a cosmic connection for mankind, because we lost it.
Not all of us have. But yes, by and large, we've lost it. It's interesting that, there are people like Graham Hancock that say the Egyptians were in touch with space beings and, extraterrestrials and all that, and that we might be again. There's some evidence that those kind of contacts. It's one of the boxes, actually, is in science. It's sort of to do with cosmism and ufology, box 105. It's next to Satanism, actually. And these are people that say, like Rael, the French guy that talked to aliens and has gone to live in Canada, that they're in touch with aliens and stuff. I mean, I'm fascinated by that stuff, and I've been part of the Scientific and Medical Network. We had a meeting with Jim Garrison recently, who's working with a thing in Washington, D.C. They're trying to get all the evidence the American state has about UFOs published. So I'd love all that to come out. But what I want is to ensure that it's done peacefully. There are people that say there are different factions of aliens all fighting each other. And if that happens, it's just like it extends the reach of all this madness of war. And we get alien battles going on. And, one group of aliens take over Moscow, and one group take over Washington, D.C., another group London, It'd be a nightmare. So what I'm saying to everyone is, let's have peace first, before disclosure. Let us humans act maturely, put our weapons down, and then we'll earn the right to cosmic wisdom. I wouldn't want cosmic wisdom to come to evil people, like the Putins of this world, and the Trumps, and people that would misuse that. So I think that would be, Imhotep's position, it's mine as well. We have to go the way of peace first, and then we earn the right to cosmic wisdom. Does that make sense? I think that was what Christ was trying to say as well, Okay, let's look at the next one, which is very relevant because this is old Marduk, the two of fire. Yes, you thought two of earth going to be easy? No, you've got two of fire to deal with. So Marduk is he represents that sort of battling warrior energy as a god. He became the most important deity in Babylon towards the latter phase of its time. And he became, he was the great hero of Babylonian mythology who defeats evil. And it's a great story. I mean, it's like, make a great Netflix series, The Adventures of Marduk, right? If anyone wants to make it, I'm happy to be a consultant because we ought to make that movie, right? And he defeats the evil devils and demons that are out to defeat humanity. And he does it with marvellous weapons. He has an array of incredible weapons that that can't be defeated. But it was touch and go for a while because he was up against it. It's very much like the Kali legend of the Hindu religion. Marduk plays the same role in Babylonian religion as Kali does in Hindu religion. She saves humanity from the evil forces, and Marduk does the same. He became the patron deity of the city of Babylon in the Euphrates Valley from the time of Hammurabi onwards, the 18th century BC. And he became rising to the head of the pantheon of Babylon. And by the second half of the second millennium BC, he was worshipped as like the top god. He had a divine weapon, the Imhulu, and he was able to use it to defeat the forces of evil. So, and he became the sort of the endorsers of the state and people in general revered him. But of course, there's always trouble with with militarizing theology, and Babylon became a conquering force, which then conquered its neighbours, and not least it conquered Jerusalem, which didn't go very very down well with the Jewish people who lived there. And then Babylon became like a code name for all that's evil. Up to the Resters, Babylon's going down is their song. I know people that say London is the new Babylon.
Paris as well.
Paris as well. Yeah. So Babylon is really not something that's cool in the thought world of the street. But if you read what I've said about Marduk, you realise actually he was quite an interesting deity. So he defeats Kingu, who Tiamat had put in charge of the army, and who wore the tablets of destiny on his breast. Marduk wrested from Kingu the tablets of destiny, wrongfully his, and assumed Marduk's reign. Humans were created to help Marduk and the gods rule with order and truth and peace. And Babylonian texts talk of the creation of Eridu by the god Marduk as the first city, the holy city, the dwelling of the gods, delight. So the Marduk prophecy is a prophecy written about the Marduk tradition, and there are all kinds of esoteric mysteries here that scholars of religion like me are just trying to decipher and understand. There were priests and priestesses and sages who were studying what Marduk had done. The Marduk prophecy was found in the house of an exorcist in the city of Assur. It was written between 713 and 612 BC. So, there are texts, ancient texts, that invoke Marduk. But I think what we've got to hold on to here is that he doesn't misuse his powers. He's incredibly powerful, a lord of defensive warfare, but he uses them for good and to help humanity. And of course, the prophet Jeremiah in the Bible rails against all things to do with Babylon and mentions Marduk by name. The Babylonians and Jews were all Semitic peoples. This is the irony. And there's a wonderful project at the University of Chicago to produce a Babylonian dictionary, which has been completed, so you can look up all the words. And Jewish words like Shabbat come from Babylonian. The Jewish calendar comes from Babylon. The idea of the every 7 days you have a holiday, a Shabbat, is a Babylonian idea. And you're supposed to dedicate it to the divine because the Shabbat is a sacred day. And that's a Babylonian idea. That's why I fast every Sunday, because it's my Shabbat, it's my sacred day. So there's a lot of mysteries here. And if this card has come into your spread, what I say is that you've got to take the battle to the enemy in wisdom and righteousness and work to defeat ignorance ultimately. Because the priests of Babylon were sages and they were learned people. They invented writing as well as the Egyptians. And that's why Alexander the Great loved it in Babylon. He captured the city after winning the Battle of Gaugamela up north in Iraq against Darius III, who put up a final resistance. But Darius had this habit of fleeing the battlefield. He was a bit of a coward, and the battle was still wasn't sure who was going to win. Darius had 100,000 troops. Alexander the Great had 40,000. Darius should have won that battle. But he saw Alexander coming to him in his chariot with a cohort of top people, and he just fled. His nerve broke because he was scared of Alexander the Great. And he knew the story that he was declared the son of a god in Egypt. And that was the end of Darius. So then he was eventually killed by one of his own ministers, fleeing to Afghanistan. And Alexander then took over Babylon. It became his capital. And he made it his base. And he respected their religion. So he honoured Marduk. He went to the temples of Marduk and honoured them and said, you can carry on with your thing. Just be good, And his vision, actually, he gave it in a lecture, a sermon he gave, just before he died, was he wanted everyone in the empire to have freedom of religion in perpetuity. And he wanted no racism of any kind. He said Greeks should marry Persians, Persians should fall in love with Jews, Jews should marry Phoenicians. He wanted love to rule. And, I don't agree with the strategy. He hoped that by bringing everyone into like one universal empire, that it would lead to world peace. That's specifically what he said in this final address. And he had been taught by Aristotle, the great philosopher, so I think he was trying to apply that vision. Aristotle had been trying to do it intellectually, to integrate all ideas into one map or, you know, typology of knowledge. But unfortunately he died in Babylon, and people think he was probably poisoned by some rivals, Alexander, before he finished his work. So I think the moral here is to, if we can see the two of fire and the two of earth working together for world healing at the time, using a peace approach instead of the military approach. Because like America conquered Babylon, they conquered Iraq, and it didn't bring peace. The people of Iraq suffered enormously under that invasion. I mean, what was the point of that? In my view, Western policy should be a peace policy. So should Israel's policy towards the Palestinians. Instead of conquering Gaza, which is the exoteric Marduk route, we should be working with each culture, hand in hand, like Alexander said in the end, you know. Let's surrender to the absolute, all of us equally, and work out a peace policy that can endure. I think that's what I read here. And let's use our intelligence, use our AI stuff for peace building. And like, there should be no unemployment on this planet. Everybody should have a meaningful, well-paid, exciting, rewarding job, you know, making something, creating stuff. And that's why I went to the Social Summit in Denmark in the mid-90s. The UN had a World Summit for Social Development, and ending unemployment was core to that, as well as ending poverty and ending social racism and disharmony. And I went, and that's where I met and listened to world leaders like Castro, Chancellor Kohl, and I still think that is the right thing to do. We need, and there is going to be a repeat. The World Summit for Social Development is happening again, I think, next year. The UN is still on track with that. Whereas all these wars are just using up our resources, filling people's lives with horror shows. It's horrible what's happening. Putin should go back and he should get my Tarot of the Gods and go off to his island in Lake Lagoda and spend a couple of years on retreat and, you know, realise their wisdom way is much better. And his neo-fascist stuff is just semi-educated. It's you know, it's false. Right. Okay. Now, let's come to the last, the penultimate thing. Okay. So every day, I like to celebrate who were the sages of that day, and this is based on this work, the Universal Calendar of Saints and Sages. I've spent, I wrote this, like I first began this when I was teaching full-time as a religious studies and philosophy teacher in the UK school system. And I've always liked saints. I just find them interesting. I think they're interesting people, saints. But I had lots of dictionaries of saints, but I could only find Christian dictionaries because they had a sort of monopoly of the definition of a saint. The church in Rome still believes it has the monopoly on declaring he's a saint, right? I doubt they're going to declare me a saint, but you never know, one lives in hope. And so I said, how about we create a dictionary of saints from all faiths? Because I was working at senior level interfaith stuff. I went to the Vatican, I was setting up the Commonwealth Faith Network and so on, Interfaith Network. And I felt we need a dictionary, a reference dictionary for saints in all faiths. So it's got 13 columns and there's one for each faith in every day of the year. It took me several years to write, obviously. I was working at weekends after teaching a busy week. And I trialled it on the students, and I still to this day like to consult this for each day of the year when I'm doing my prayer hour in the mornings. So I want to share for the Philosophy Club for the first time, I haven't done this before, who are the saints of today. And by the way, I include sages because, for instance, in Taoism, there's no such category as a saint as such, but there are sages, and usually the sages have saint-like quality, and magical powers and miraculous powers and so on. The same in Shintoism. There isn't an official thing where you're declared a saint in Shintoism, but there are very learned people in the Shinto tradition who would be called a sage. I don't know what the Japanese term is, but there will be one. And so, and the same with Buddhism. There's no real thing called a Buddhist saint, although there were people whose enlightenment was recognised by Buddha. I have a story about a Buddhist saint I met without really realising it. I went to the World Social Summit in Copenhagen. I'd just been to the World Conference on Religion and Peace in Rome and met lots of religious leaders from all over the world. There were 800 of us. And one of the chaps I met there was a Buddhist monk from Cambodia who was wearing his yellow robes, a lovely man. We got chatting, and I went to the Buddhist caucus, because as well as everything else, I'm a kind of Buddhist, and there were more Buddhists from all different parts of the world than any other event I'd been at. And he was there, and we got chatting, we liked each other. And it turned out he was going to Copenhagen, which was like a week later or something. So we met up there as well. And I was trying to organise a kind of little meditation space at the back of the conference hall for the delegates to the World Social Summit, because I thought spirituality should be part of that. Anyway, long story short, we met, we talked, we were at the conference, as NGO leaders and so on. And then he asked for a lift to the airport, which I gave him. And I can't remember, I think shared a taxi or something. I said to him, "Where's your luggage?" He only had a little tiny pack under one arm. He'd flown all the way from Cambodia. He'd been in Europe for like several months, and he had no luggage. Like, he had just like one little pack, a begging bowl, and a couple of other things like, I don't know, toothbrush, whatever. And I then later discovered, I don't think I knew at the time, that he had personally led a march across Cambodia through the minefields. Cambodia is one of the most heavily mined places in the world. He did it as a Buddhist monk to show we shouldn't be afraid of mines. We can get these things out of the ground and reclaim Cambodia for humanity. We can use compassion. And he walked several hundred miles through the minefields, leading a group, as a symbol of mind over matter. And he survived, he wasn't blown up. And, that's the kind of level of saint that Buddhists believe in. He did actually, I think, win lots of prizes and stuff. He was quite a famous guy. He's dead now. But anyway, I've met people like that in all different faiths. So he's in the book. There's a column for Buddhism. There's a column for Hinduism, because they have their rishis and saints and sages and yogis. There's a column for Christians. They obviously have theirs. And there's a column for pagans, for all different traditions, ancient Greek, Druid, Wiccan, the whole lot, Norse, rune people. There's a column for Islam, sages and saints from the Islamic tradition, Sufis. There's a column for Judaism, so sages from the Jewish tradition. Again, they don't have an official saint category. They have prophets, and sometimes the prophets count as like sages. So they're in there. And then there's a column for Chinese and Japanese religions, like Far Eastern religions. They have their column. And then there's a column for Jainism and other, like Sikhism, sort of smaller religions. They have to share a column. Sorry about that. Then there's a column for esoteric thinkers, because I didn't quite know where to put them. People that are expert in esoteric thought. I thought they should have their own column. And then there's a column for Freemasons, because, they are interesting. And they've done a lot of creative things in the world intellectually. Napoleon was one. He's in the column of Freemasons. And so is Voltaire, you know. And then finally there's a column for women, because I realised as I was compiling the book there weren't going to be enough women in the other columns, because women haven't been given great positions of authority by most official religions. And yet I like women, and they're incredibly intelligent and amazing. So there's a column for women. And then there's a column for secular arts and culture, like Picasso and painters and musicians, etc. So I'm just going to share very briefly the column. Do you want to, you go first, tell me the column you want me to mention first, and I'll share. Of the ones I just shared, which would you like to go with first? For today, the 11th of February.
A woman?
The woman. Okay, so today we celebrate and honour the work of Karen Blixen, who was a Danish writer, 1885 to 1962. And it's interesting that Denmark housed the World Social Summit. I went to Copenhagen. I stayed with a Danish woman who had volunteered to host visitors. We had an amazing experience there, and there's a very strong feminist tradition in Denmark, I discovered. And she was one of them, you know, an early woman writer. And I discovered something yesterday, doing some work. There's a thing called the World Justice Project, which has a rule of law index, and it ranks countries by how lawful, how law-abiding, how strong are their human rights, their intellectual freedom, all that kind of stuff. And Denmark came out first. Out of all the nations in the world, it has the highest mark in the World Justice Project. Russia's quite low down, but Denmark was top, interestingly. Pakistan is kind of in the middle, and India is slightly better, but not much. I'd like to see them all number one. You know, I'd love to see the world all get to the Denmark quality. And I think that's to do with the advancement of women, to full equality with men. And their qualities, which aren't physical violence, men are stronger on the whole, but their spiritual strength. I think that's part of it. And Karen Blixen wrote about all this stuff. Okay, Sophie, you choose next one.
Jainism.
Well, good choice, since we've got a conference coming up with the Jains this coming
Yes,
week
lovely.
on non-violence, run from my friends the Jains in Rajasthan. This saint is called Jinaprabha Suri. The Jains are pretty strict. They have they wear like a veil across their mouth because they don't want to swallow insects. And I always say it's like the vicar's white collar has slipped up to cover the mouth. When I've talked to Jain saints, they all wear this thing. They take the view of total non-violence is the way to go. And that means not killing insects. And they're all quite strict vegetarians, if not vegans. But they also practice non-violence of thought, word and deed, of all types. And they influence Gandhi a lot. We've just rewatched the film Gandhi, which is a masterpiece by my late friend, Lord Attenborough. And it's a beautiful film. If you've not seen it, you know, watch it. Because the Jain idea of non-violence is in Gandhi's work. He was inspired by the Jains. They say, and this saint said, that what we should be doing as human beings is finding enlightenment. Kaivalya Jnana, which means holistic knowledge. Jnana is the generic term for knowledge in Jain Prakrit. And Mahavira taught this. You can't really get there if you're doing violence. It doesn't work. And because then you're full of fear, and they're going to revenge, and I'm terrified, and you know, your whole emotional state becomes turbulent. So to become a Jain saint, you have to take the path of ahimsa, non-violence. They also say on philosophical matters, you can't master everything there is to know about the entire universe in your human form. You have to accept certain limitations to your knowledge and be comfortable with that. Because you don't have to know everything before you do righteous action. It's like two legs. You learn more, you study more, you become a bit more enlightened, and then you act it, you enact it. So you do less violence, you do more justice, you act dharmically. But I can't tell you sitting here how many gods there are in the universe. I mean, the universe is vast, trillions and trillions of planets. I mean, you know, and the Jains would say, yeah, that's right, Thomas, you can't know that. You're not supposed to, it's not necessary. There's probably quite a few. And I did explore this mathematically in my book on religious mathematics, which was inspired by meeting Jains partly, because they invented the concept of infinity. Jain mathematicians are brilliant. And I attended a conference in Delhi, I think it was, on Jain mathematics. And they've been doing this stuff since before Christianity was even thought up, you know. I asked him a question: how many souls are becoming enlightened at any one time in the universe? And the Jain mathematics woman, professor, twinkled at me and she said, infinite number. So then we had a conversation about what do we mean by infinity. And for the Jains, there are 6 types of infinity. So they're great. The Jains are wonderful, and they love intellecting, you know. And just, I wish we could all get some aspect of that non-violence. We can't all live, you know, as a full Jain monk. They have lay people that don't wear the collar and all that stuff, but they try and live peacefully and non-violently. So anyway, we honour this saint today. Thank you very much. Okay, next one. Another column.
Islam.
Okay. Okay, we have a Sufi, Ibn Farid Umar, who was living around the 1190s. And he was one of the Sufi, you know, wisdom holders of the time. The 1190s were a difficult time in the Islamic world. The Crusades were going on. Western Crusaders, Christians, had conquered Jerusalem and put a lot of Muslims to the sword. There was a silly thinking that killing Muslims would somehow bring us closer to God. It was a knights in armour type thing. And of course the Muslims fought back, and there was chaos. And Ibn Farid was part of a minority group saying, let's make peace. The Sufi tradition said, actually we have much more in common with Christians than people realise. The Muslims revere Jesus as the Messiah. You know, like, what's not to discuss here? I mean, what the Muslims didn't agree with was this idea of him being the only son of God. And I can agree with that because, like, well, Alexander was the son of God, wasn't he? I mean, throughout history there have been other sons of God. Hercules was the son of God. Dionysus was the son of God. Like, as a concept, what it seems to me to mean is that somebody was very holy and powerful and come to fix stuff, you know. In Hinduism there are sons of Brahma and sons of Vishnu and sons of Shiva. And they're always on the team of healing and helping. We heard earlier Imhotep was a son of Ptah. In Egyptian mythology, there's you can be a son of God, and the goddess. You can be a daughter of the goddess as well. So I think, but the Muslims would say yes, all that's true, but in an absolute sense, we're all children of God, or none of us are, you know. So I personally would much rather we sat down at the feet of Ibn Farid Umar in the time of the Crusades than go and try and kill them all.